So quality of life and wellness in PNES. What is quality of life? What is health-related quality of life? And why are we even talking about this in a PNES conference, right? So quality of life is, and this is the definition, the perceived quality of an individual's emotional, physical, and social life. So it's how the individual is perceiving that this is going. And it's made up of many factors: social, economic conditions, safety, living conditions, health, etc. So when we talk about quality of life and when we measure quality of life, we are looking at all of these different variables. With epilepsy and seizures and non-epileptic seizures, there's the added piece of the seizures themselves that can have a very real impact on quality of life. Health-related quality of life, similar, but it's just health-related. And so, obviously, health problems can affect someone's quality of life. Health can have a very major effect on someone's quality of life. Contributes to health-related quality of life. It's a whole series of things that can contribute. There are actual limitations that can be the result of the health condition. Driving, not being able to drive, has a major effect on many people, especially if they don't have the fortune of living in a really a city with fantastic transportation services and so forth. It can be a real impediment to all sorts of independent behaviors if you're not able to drive. Safety concerns, functional status can also be affected by health, so there can be effects on thinking and memory and other cognitive functions. Depression, anxiety can also come, they may have preceded the seizures, or can also be worsened or can begin after the seizures. Obstacles to physical exercise and so forth, obstacles to even being physical because of the health condition. Other questions that might affect health-related quality of life is support system, and you'll hear that sometimes throughout the day it was mentioned, support system, having a good family support system, friends, caregivers, relatives, etc., can have a huge effect on health-related quality of life in improving it or not improving it. And there can be economic concerns that also play a role. When there's a health condition, all of these things can start to be in play as well, and all of that can affect your quality of life. So it's so dark, but what this is this is a house, and there's a sinkhole. So basically what I was saying is quality of life can change, and it can change sometimes in a day. So these people had a very nice backyard, and the next morning they wake up and they have a sinkhole in their backyard. And that's also can happen sometimes with health, where everything was fine and then something happens and then your health all of a sudden is not good. And that can affect, that has an effect on the quality of life. Now, quality of life in people with PNES is often very poor. And there are even a number of studies that have shown that compared to people who have intractable epilepsy, that means epilepsy that is not responding to treatment and medication, quality of life in PNES can be worse than in people who have intractable epilepsy. And I'll open this up now. Why do you think that might be? I mean, is there any idea why the quality of life is so poor in PNES? And if you don't know, I'll have the answers after.
Good one.
Go ahead, sure.
I think lack of care. I mean, trying to find somebody who will give you the answers and help you out. It's depressing, and it's debilitating because you think, what is wrong with me? Why am I doing this? And that it just builds and builds and builds, and it makes that so much harder.
Yeah.
Just to leave the house because you're worried, hey, my doctor doesn't believe me, neither do my neighbors.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of things there. One is maybe not having the caring attitude and not feeling understood by the health professionals but also the limitations, right, of not being able to leave because of this and that, and what are people going to think, and what's going to happen, right, if I leave the house. So all of those are definite, yes.
From a caregiver's standpoint, it's scary because I don't know what's going to happen when she goes from point A to point B. If she has a large seizure, are we going to call the ambulance? One of our biggest concerns is when she travels and we're not together, is she going to be able to get all the way from point A to point B through the airport? Am I going to have to fly somewhere to go pick her up because somebody has put her in the emergency room?
Yeah, and definitely caregivers are often the forgotten population, and quality of life for caregivers also suffers, because you're right. There's a sense of, if I leave for work, what's going to happen, when she's alone, or if she travels, or what do we do if I get a call and she's in the emergency room, et cetera, et cetera. And just the concerns that something might happen to her, when you're not around. So yeah, so the caregiver is the forgotten person in this equation often, yeah.
And I'm sorry, one other portion of this too. We have young children. Oldest is 14. Oldest is 14. Youngest is 7. And the first few months that we were going through this, they were scared to be around their mom because they didn't know what was going on. The question is trying to answer them and let them know she's okay. This is the way it's going to be for a while. And we noticed that their friends were scared to come over. But what's been kind of good with this is we live in a small community, 250 people, so we've got a lot of support. But we also, like you were saying, we live in the middle of nowhere. So with her not being able to drive, not only for her, but doctor's appointments and everything for the children, that's been very difficult. And then just the kids, their friends not wanting to come over. Now that the community has kind of surrounded us and helped some, it's come up a little bit. We have children over our house all the time. Before all this had happened, my wife actually worked in the school with the special education program.
Okay. Yes.
And then with that, and then before we moved to Nebraska, she ran a successful 24/7 daycare where she was dealing with 10 children at one time.
Yeah.
And now it's difficult just doing
So
basic
that
stuff.
also affects the quality of life. They often have trouble keeping a job, or not having a job, not being able to drive, for example, not being able to be independent, how other people are responding, even the other children, right, who are scared to come over, and then your own children. So all of that, I mean, that's a beautiful explanation of, of why quality of life can be impacted with PNES. So there are, many of the things you already said. One is the seizures themselves. Seizure disorders, epilepsy and non-epileptic seizures, one of the most troubling things that they have is that they appear unexpectedly. They happen unexpectedly for the most part. So they can happen wherever, whenever, and that's nothing that you can prepare for, right? Because you're going through your day, your regular routine, and suddenly this happens. They can be potentially dangerous if depending on what your seizures are like. Some people have a very, very quiet, brief seizure, but some people have a seizure where there's movement or where there's maybe loss of muscle tone. So then that can be potentially dangerous if you fall or if you hit yourself. And they can affect your work and your social life and your education. So of course, all of this can have an impact on your quality of life. So there are some real limitations that might follow, and that has a major impact. There are other psychological factors we already talked about: depression, anxiety, trauma history, PTSD. So all of that is also playing a role in bringing your quality of life and your sense of quality of life down. And then what you mentioned is there's still a lot of ignorance and a lot of negative attitudes held by health professionals about PNES. So there can sometimes be, you can encounter uncaring or even negative responses from health professionals. There is, not in all health professionals, but in a number, there can be the feeling that this is being faked, that this is drug-seeking behavior, which is what you sometimes hear. attention-seeking behavior, which is a terrible thing to encounter when you are coming to look for help from a health professional, and then this is what you're receiving in exchange. And I listed there this blog. I write a blog more or less every month. Sometimes I get a little lazy and it's less than every month, but it's about every month. And here, blog. And we wrote, or I wrote a blog post. We were doing research with Jace, who's there filming. He's also a research assistant as well as a camera guy. And we were doing some research on internet and how PNES appears on the internet and whatnot. And we were looking at Twitter, and Twitter written by professionals or self-identified professional tweets. So you should look at the blog, and you need to be prepared because some of the tweets were very negative, and they were expressing some of this, which is, this is not real, this is wasting my time, or, this is, there's a drug-seeking behavior involved in all of this. So that, to encounter that, when you already have everything that we've talked about throughout the morning, is not only not helpful, but it's actually the opposite of helpful.
Hollywood also causes a lot of issues with this too. I remember watching one of the ER sitcoms with my wife, and they specifically had one episode where a guy came in and it looked like it was PNES type symptoms, and they made fun of him.
It's ignorance. It's not knowing what this is, and not understanding all of the things that have led up to developing PNES. I think it's also often, when we don't know, we're supposed to know, so there's a tendency to, want to not present as not knowing, and then also a need to get patients out quickly because there's a rapid turnaround, and so it's a whole series of things that play a role in this. And I want to think that for the most part, health professionals, if they were better educated, they would have a very different attitude. And I think that's really what's missing. The systematic education of health professionals, emergency medical professionals, and so forth, in understanding that this is a very serious health condition, and it's not something to be made fun of, or it's not that every single person who walks in is looking for drugs or is looking for attention. Often the discharge from the hospital is speedy. There is some patients will have report hearing, I need this hospital bed. There are limited hospital beds, we all understand that, but the sense that I need this hospital bed for a patient who is really sick, with PNES. And so then that's communicated. Often no referrals are given. So the diagnosis is given, okay, you have PNES, which is already hard to wrap your head around, and then no actual referral is given. And then often mental health professionals are unfamiliar with the disorder. I already heard several people today tell me that, they've called and they've been told by the psychiatrist or by the psychologist, I've never heard of that, I don't know what that is, or, I'm going to treat your depression, but I don't want to even get close to the seizures, which is ridiculous because this is also a psychological condition, so it falls under the scope of practice of a mental health professional. And often patients will get bounced back and forth from mental health, they have a seizure, they get sent back to the neurologist because the psychologist or the psychiatrist doubts the diagnosis, and so then that starts to happen. And I put this up. We had done an informal survey on our website, just asking when you were first given your diagnosis of PNES, did you also receive, and if you picked several, then you was just supposed to pick the one that was the most useful for you. Did you also receive, and we gave some options. And we had 115 votes, and this is not a scientific poll or anything like that. It was just whoever checked into our website. But what we got was that only 27% reported that they had being given the actual name of a therapist or a psychiatrist or some sort of mental health professional. And if you go down to the bottom, 32 had received nothing, nothing other than, and I believe that this poll is actually pretty accurate because this is what I often hear from communication. So 32 had received nothing other than being told you don't have epilepsy, you have something called PNES. And then 29% had been given the recommendation to seek a therapist on their own, which can sometimes happen because you have limitations through insurance and whatnot, so sometimes that is going to end up being the way to go. 3% had received a book, and 10% had received a pamphlet. But these were the responses to basically what was most helpful that you had received when you were discharged. So it's a little frightening. And then there's ignorance and negative attitudes, not just of the health professionals, but also of the general public, like you were saying, some of the children, possibly people in the town, where there's again the sense that this is not a real condition. Sometimes there's even a negative attitude when the diagnosis is presented to the family, where the family will say, I thought you had epilepsy, I thought you had a real health condition, now we find out that you have this. So there can often be the communicated message, which can be communicated in many ways, but get over it, you're not getting better because you aren't making any effort, you lack willpower, and that almost there's some way that you could will this to go away. And I've heard sometimes patients saying that even health professionals have said to them, if you really want this to go away, if you really just will it, it'll go away. It depends on you. And that's a very unfair position to put someone in with this type of health condition. There's often an overreaction. EMS is called at the drop of a hat, which leads to very expensive hospital bills. And PNES information isn't readily available. So all of these are things that can potentially affect quality of life. That's the topic we're talking about, quality of life. So there are real changes, loss of independence, loss of mobility, a sick status, feeling like you're sick, and that's how you start to be identified. Inactivity, maybe losing your job, maybe having trouble going to school or not being able to continue your education. But, and with all of that, which is all very, very negative, quality of life is also a choice. And I think that's really important to remember, and I'm not just saying that. There are certain things that are in your control and that you can work on to make your quality of life better. So we'll think about some of them, and then you think to see if there's anything in your life that would fit this. So quality of life and safety. You could say, I have these episodes, so I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to move, I'm going to stay in a bubble. Or you could say, okay, let's look at the characteristics of these episodes. What are they like? Because like we said, every person has a different kind of PNES episode. Do you have paralysis during the episode? Do you have very intense thrashing? Do you fall? Do you this and that? And so based on that, and a lot of times with your therapist, you can examine that and figure out, okay, what sort of things can I still do, even if I'm having these episodes? Always with the goal that at some point you're not going to have these episodes, but let's not stop living just because at this point you're having these episodes. You can educate important people in your life about what your episodes look like, what they need to do, if you have something like this. So, for example, you can still have friends over, or still have, maybe one particular friend, or still do certain things with people that have been educated as to this is what happens to me, and this is what I need for you to do if it does happen. It might not. Preventing injuries, and this again depends. If you have very brief staring spells, then you're not going to need any of this. But if there is the potential to injure yourself, often using the same types of safety rules that you have with epilepsy. So you might pad sharp corners of furniture in bathrooms, etc. You might use thick rugs. So if you fall, you're going to fall on a hard surface. You might avoid open flames or using microwaves. Using microwaves might be the way to go. Care when you're removing objects, either from the oven or the microwave. Avoiding steep staircases. If you tend to fall, then that's something to work into your safety plan. And making sure that someone is home, for example, when you're showering, not locking the bathroom door, maybe putting a sign on it, making sure that the door opens outwards rather than inwards in case you've fallen, keeping away from the side of the road or the subway or the train tracks. So again, it'll depend on what your episodes are like, and each person can have their own safety plan, but always trying to figure out, okay, what is the maximum I can do while I'm working on getting better from this. So these are just some examples of a padded thing, thick rug. First aid, it's going to depend on your episode. So again, you may need to educate certain people about people who you're going to be with the most or who are the most important. This is what I need for you to do when I have an episode. It's going to differ if you tend to zone out, and if that's all that happens, then you may just need for someone to stay with you until you recover, and then to check that you're okay, and then you can go on your way. If the seizures are very physically intense, then someone may need to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. May need to move some furniture out of the way. So you'll explain, based on what you know that your seizures are like, and figure out, this is the plan, this is what I need to happen, just in case this happens. Calling an ambulance is not usually necessary unless you've injured yourself during the episode, or unless the episode is really unusual. Let's say that this is a very different kind of episode, that usually episodes are typical and stereotyped. If this is a different episode or much longer, or there's anything that seems out of the ordinary, then you may consider calling emergency medical services. But for the most part, it's not necessary. And the episodes will end on their own, and then the last thing you need is to go through several hours of 12 hours of being in an emergency room, et cetera, et cetera. You can carry a laminated card, and I'll often go through this with patients that, describe what your seizure looks like, who are the important people to call, what are people supposed to do if you happen to have a seizure. So you give some basic information that is laminated. Some people get an aura before they have a seizure, so they might pull it out and make sure that it's there in case a seizure happens and they can't speak. But again, each seizure is different, each person is different, so you would make this tailored to yourself. Wearing medical alert jewelry. I heard someone ask, what do we do when I have a seizure outside and they take me immediately to the emergency room? And so wearing medical alert jewelry could say conversion disorder. That might be better than saying PNES. Few people know what that is. And there are some bracelets now that have a chip, or I'm very non-technological, so I'm not the best person for describing this, but there are some bracelets that have a whole bunch of information on there, so it can be accessed, and then you'll have your medical history or the main things that the emergency personnel need to know. And then in your cell phone, you can have under contacts ICE in case of emergency, and often they will look for if there's a name of someone who should be contacted. So this is one example of a bracelet. This is a bracelet of someone who's here, who made it herself, and it's got the little colors and it's got some information. And there's a whole variety of things that you can use to make sure that it's communicated if you're not able to speak. PNES and driving is often a question, can I really not drive? It's not epilepsy. But in all honesty, if there's a possibility that you have an episode and that you could get into an accident, then that's a very serious thing, and that's something that the responsible decision would be to not drive while the episodes are very uncontrolled or even potentially happen while you're driving. They do vary state to state. The laws are different. So some states are 6 months of seizure freedom, some states are 1 year of seizure freedom, some states are 3 months of seizure freedom, so it'll depend on what state you live in. And how to get around, again, sometimes thinking out of the box. So there may be public transportation, reliance on others, taxis, wholesale rates, walking, riding a bicycle, etc. Some people become very healthy when they develop physically healthy, because they do tend to walk more or obviously not drive, and so then for short distances maybe walking or riding a bicycle, depending on what the episodes are like, right? And for work, if possible, I do always recommend to try to continue working or get temporary disability, but always with the objective of going back to work. And some jobs will work with you, and they have accommodations, and they may, allow for time for doctor's visits or working from home, etc. So, depending each person, we would go over some of this. What are the accommodations that are possible? Is it possible for you to continue working in any way? And if you lose your job, very important to avoid isolation. Volunteer work, social activities through community centers or through the doctor's office itself can be all ways to maintain some connection with others. And if nothing else has worked, and if you've done all kinds of efforts, and you've been in treatment and you've done this and you've done that, and then the seizures continue, then we would talk about a disability application, but only then. I like to be optimistic, and our goal is to get you not have seizures and to get back to work, studying, or whatever it is that you want to do. So avoiding social isolation, very important, and there's a series of things, and if they don't exist where you live, there are epilepsy foundations that you can contact and say, hey, there's a bunch of us who have this, and we would like to work with you to set this up. Major medical centers sometimes will work with you as well. And you also need to take care of yourself. So exercise, therapy, sleep, diet are all important pieces for PNES and for quality of life in PNES. So you want to get medical clearance before you launch into an exercise program, but there are different exercises that can be safe, even if you have PNES. So you're going to choose your fitness level, and there might be, if you're on a treadmill, you might have the cord that automatically stops if you happen to fall. But there are ways around the seizures and ways to keep you active. So there are safe exercises. These are just some examples. So this is Pilates or yoga that are relatively safe. Even if you have a seizure, you're close to the floor and you should be fine. These are potentially dangerous exercises, is sort of a joke, but weight right on top of your head, not a good idea, or mountain climbing a cliff. And why exercise? It's really for multiple reasons, and it's been shown as well in epilepsy that exercise, physical exercise, helps mood, helps physical health. So I'm a real proponent of trying to maintain yourself physically active in whatever way you can. There's all sorts of things to consider: brisk walking, moderate jogging, cycling on a stationary bike. There's some recumbent bikes, core muscle training, Tai Chi, yoga, Zumba, if you're into that, gardening, martial arts, certain martial arts. All of these are possibilities depending on what your seizures are like. Sleep, we all know that not sleeping is very bad for you. So some of the things, these are just basic guidelines, but some of the things you can think about doing is figure out how many hours of sleep you need. Try to go to bed at the same time. We all could benefit from these guidelines. Keeping the room dark and somewhat cool, and the recommended temperature is 65 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Making sure your mattress and your pillows are comfortable and are new, and then using the bed only for sex and sleep, so that you are programming yourself that the bed is for this, you know, and you don't eat in the bed and watch movies in bed and all of these other things where it ends up giving you the wrong message that, you know, bed should be automatically bed, go to sleep. Recommending, obviously, don't eat heavy meals, don't use alcohol to induce sleep, which is a common mistake. People think that it makes them sleepy, it's going to help to sleep, and it actually messes up your sleep much worse. Don't drink caffeine in the evening. Don't take naps if possible, or if you do, you take very short naps. And if you can't sleep, the recommendation is you should get out of bed after 30 minutes. So get out, do something else, and then you come back. So that's the goal. Diet, I'm going to go very quickly because we have it in ready, and these are just basic guidelines of do's and don'ts to keep yourself healthy and unhealthy. Take-home message. Quality of life in PNES is definitely affected, but you can always work on figuring out a way to improve your quality of life even during the most active phase of the seizures. Participating in psychological treatment, obviously, I mean, the entire morning was about that, so that's key. 2, taking care of yourself through exercise, sleep, eating properly. It's very important to take care of your body as well as your mind. And often when you're in the house, bored, there is a tendency to eat junk food, eat more, don't exercise, your sleep gets out of whack. So important just to keep that in mind, that that's another piece to keeping yourself healthy. Avoid social isolation, use community resources. If they don't exist, contact them and say, I need this, you know, or there are people who need this. And epilepsy foundations are often open to hearing about PNES and things that they might be able to do. Support groups may exist, also need to find out. And become part of the PNES community is very important, and I've seen a lot of people who come here in first conference and became part of the community, and it has been very helpful to them. They've helped others, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big piece. And owning the condition, educating yourself about the condition so that you can educate others. Very important as well to improve your own quality of life to be able to do this. So I'm just going to go through these pictures. I know I'm getting like a message that I'm way over time, but stuff that we have done as part of the community. We went to DC and we had our first PNES team that walked with the Epilepsy Foundation, the National Epilepsy Walk. These are just some pictures of us with a t-shirt on asking about psychogenic seizures. We've been writing, if any of you have been following this, writing bike-a-thons to raise funds for Epilepsy Free. That's me, right there. This is Dr. Lankman. Knitting, we have a knitting workshop. So these are, you can't actually see it all that well, but we have people around a table who are learning how to knit. There was one person who knew how to knit and taught everyone else, and we would have cupcakes and other yummy stuff to eat while people were learning how to knit. The first scarf you keep, the second scarf, we keep it to raffle. So that's where we get the raffle items from. This conference is another way to stay connected socially. And there's my email, so let's stay in touch. If you have a question or anything else, then you can get right to me. Okay? Okay, so that's